Now, Walz is weird, but he disguises it under a costume of phony compassion. A fake politician asks destructive ideas under the guise of empathy. At a 2017 town hall, he implied 10-year-old boys should be able to invade girls' bathrooms.
Walz is now saying about Trump supporters, and forgive me, I'm just reading a quote from Tim Walz, I think I could kick most of their ass.
Oh boy, he'd be in trouble.
Is there any way to know?
Well, he's a loser, you know, I mean, the guy's a loser.
You believe you know the story? Think again. Because this political train crash took a detour right into Crazy Town. Greg Gutfeld linked up with Donald Trump. Yes, that combo. To totally scorch Tim Walz like it was a 4th of July BBQ1. Minute Walz is giving speeches, and the next he's doing verbal gymnastics, trying to evade searing sarcasm and ego grenades. What set them off? Why is Minnesota suddenly trending? Spoiler. It's more embarrassing than karaoke night at Mar-A-Lago.
Tim Walz continues to be criticized for impeaching his rank and service. After it came out over the weekend, he once claimed to be an official bikini inserter. His direct superior in the National Guard says Walz knew his unit was to deploy to Iraq and went behind the back of his superior officer to resign. When reached comment, Walz yelled, "Hey, look over there," and then ran away.
I think I would have won. Susie would say I would have won Pennsylvania easily anyway, even if the governor ran, the real governor, not the governor from Minnesota, he's a sick puppy, that guy. That poor guy, I feel sorry for him. But they made a...
They say leadership is about vision. But Tim Walz must have read that and thought it said television because that's the only screen he seems to care about. Preferably, the one showing his next embarrassing press conference where he blames gravity, sunshine, and perhaps Greg Gutfeld for his latest fiasco. The man rules Minnesota like it's a Sims game with all the calamities turned on and no cheat codes. If you thought potholes were terrible, wait till you see his policies. Deep, inevitable, and purposefully placed to harm everything.
Walz, it's hard to even bring him up. He has a resting snitch face. You know? He forfeited his man card during COVID and the riot. And you're right. And also, at that diner, of course, he left early. So don't you find it weird for a terrifying threat to democracy that Trump is? Not a single interviewer in his history has approached him.
So don't you think it funny that for a serious menace to democracy, Trump is not a single interviewer in the history of his history has approached him with trepidation? Minnesota under Walz has become the political equivalent of a frozen casserole sitting in the back of the fridge since 2020. Boring, old, and vaguely radioactive. But don't worry, he's serving it up again with a fresh side of excuses. Meanwhile, Greg Gutfeld, armed with the snark of a caffeinated raccoon, and Trump, armed with the subtlety of a wrecking ball strapped to a monster truck, chose to tag team roast this walking press release.
Yeah, this one's a quote we saw just read Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. First things they do is try and restrict the vote.
Wait, so Trump is making it more difficult for women to vote? How so? Problems? But it's further that the most dangerous thing for a leftist is a follow-up question, which is why
Gutfeld didn't even need prep. The content writes itself when you've got a guy who shut down a state so hard during the pandemic that even Wi-Fi signals had to quarantine. You'd think with all that executive power he'd be able to solve something, anything. But no. Roads still resemble the surface of the moon. Taxes are so exorbitant they have a nosebleed. And don't even get started on crime. Minneapolis beneath Walz became a real-life GTA.
Especially talking about these old white guys who seem to disappoint on a regular basis in this country.
Dude, you're an old white guy. And you're right, you are a huge disappointment. I guess hating himself is the first thing he's nailed correct.
Server with less accountability and inferior graphics. At least Trump does something. Even if that something is outrageously contentious, oftentimes incomprehensible, and always in all uppercase. Walz, by comparison, is the king of inertia. He governs like a substitute instructor on autopilot.
People people misreading Tim's odd greeting. The man of the hour, Tim Walz, brings us our second video of the day and his very weird way of greeting his wife of 30 years. Roll it. I want to see this in slow motion. You'll see Walz extends his hand to his wife. She grabs it, they shake, he pulls her close, and then goes in non-friction hug, all the while still shaking her hand. I wish there was a word to describe that. Oh yeah, weird.
Lots of babbling, zero control. Instead, he's turned schools into experimental think laboratories for political correctness, where mathematics is optional, but preferred pronoun exams are essential. The only thing rising in exam results is the level of confusion. Meanwhile, Trump stands there with his arms crossed, watching Walz stumble through press conferences like a dad trying to set up Wi-Fi. And Gutfeld, he's essentially enjoying the fun of his life, turning barriers into a punchline that writes itself. 1 minute, Tim Walz was talking about following the science like it was a sacred scroll.
I used to think the Democrats were crazy for saying that men have periods, but then I met Tim Walz.
Next thing you know, he's proclaiming that bars have to close at 10 p.m., as if Co suddenly becomes intoxicated and forgets to infect people before that. Genius. Trump couldn't help but belittle the guy. That's like Jasmine Crockett saying, "I got to black this up," and through it all, Walz still manages to keep a straight face. Like a man who believes truly that no one's realized the entire home is on fire. Every time someone brings up crime in Minneapolis, he talks about community participation like he's marketing a yoga class to a SWAT team. Speaking of law enforcement, remember when Minneapolis wanted to rethink policing? That was Walz's chance to say, hey, maybe don't dismantle the entire police force during a crime surge. But instead, he tiptoed around it like a dad hesitant to tell his toddler no.
Minnesota, there were a lot of horrific details that came out today about the suspect who's been charged there. Have you called the governor yet or been able to speak to any of them?
I don't really call him. Look, I think the governor of Minnesota is so whacked out. I'm not calling him. Why would I call him? I could call him and say, hi, how you doing? The guy doesn't have a clue. He's a mess. So, I could be nice and call him, but why waste time?
We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, you damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them, and we're going to execute them.
Wait, you lost because you weren't woken. That's like telling Joy Behar she's not eating enough of those. That's like Jasmine Crockett saying, I gotta black this.
The result? Chaos, confusion, and an increase in criminal activity that would make Gotham City blush. Gutfeld portions on Walz may be characterized as therapy for Mertens, who just want to hear someone express what they're already thinking, that their governor couldn't organize a sock drawer, let alone a functioning government. Trump, not one to miss an opportunity, gleefully joins in, pointing out every pothole, every failing policy, and every awful haircut Walz has ever had. Tim Walz approaches feedback like it's spam mail, glances at it, deletes it, and then blames the sender.
The tampon king gets back in the ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramps. I wonder, our strength, our diversity?
Strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this.
He once said he was taking decisive action on infrastructure. People got excited. Turns out, brave action means hiring experts to develop PowerPoints on potholes. And let's not forget Walz's assault on landlords. Rent control regulations that sounded excellent on a Twitter discussion, but played out like a live-action eviction of common sense. Now, small landlords are resigning. Major ones are boosting rents, and renters are caught in limbo. Tim's solution, a task force, which in political words implies a meeting where we'll spend 4 months defining the word problem. Trump and Gutfeld just sat back and watched the slow-motion nightmare unfold. The state that brought us Prince, Bob Dylan, And 10,000 lakes is now being administered like a college dorm, where the R never shows up.
As a teacher, my number one responsibility in the classroom is the safety, security, and belongingness of every single child in that room. These are children son's age, a 4th grader, a 10-year-old, who just go to the bathroom, and their identity is male or female, and they just go in that bathroom and use it, end quote. Sounds so folksy, you know? Belongingness. Yeah, they'll be belonging in therapy with this.
Gutfeld joked that Walz's leadership style is PowerPoint-based government with a significant emphasis on public bewilderment. And, speaking of confusion, transportation under Walz is a shambles. Projects delayed, over budget, and underwhelming. He sought to promote new light rail expansions, but ignored the bit where trains are meant to run on schedule or exist. Even Trump's infrastructure week had more cohesion, and that was a political...
Walz. There he is. You know, we're the same age. I know. I know. He looks like the founder of a law firm specializing in personal injury. He looks like the guy at church who remarries one after his wife mysteriously passes away. He looks like the high school football coach who made sure...
Cliché. The only thing moving in Tim Walz's transportation plans is the paperwork backward. And hey, if this continues up, Tim Walz might be qualified for his own late-night show, Clueless in the Capitol. No guests, no budget, and no answers. Just one man, a mic, and a pile of unfinished executive orders he wanted to read sometime back in 2019. Call it sad. Call it comedy. Just don't call it leadership. And just when you think Tim Walz has run out of ways to surprise you, boom, he smacks you with another big visionary stride backward. His climate initiatives resemble a Pinterest board consisting of half-baked dreams, paper straws, and solar panels that only operate on Wednesdays. Meanwhile, rural Montanans are still stuck driving 45 minutes to find a food store that hasn't been taxed into another realm. Even Gutfeld had to laugh. Walz managed to take one of the most resource-rich, naturally blessed states in the country and operate it like a failed cooperative project. At this point, Minnesota's official bird might as well be a tax auditor. And Trump, he could barely contain his pleasure, watching Walz try to describe economic recovery with the assurance of a guy who just discovered what GDP stands for. Every speech sounds like it was created by an AI trained on motivational posters and cereal box phrases. There's no urgency, no leadership, just a man shuffling PowerPoint slides while the building burns. And yet, he still demands applause like a magician who forgot the act, dropped the rabbit, and the Wi-Fi is good. In the bunker he sawed himself in half. But hey, at least